In the ruthless chessboard of global geopolitics, alliances rarely shatter in dramatic explosions. Instead, they bend, adjust, and evolve under pressure. For more than 5 decades, the relationship between India and Russia has stood as one of the most resilient strategic partnerships in international politics, rooted in Cold War calculations and reinforced by consistent defense, energy, and diplomatic cooperation. From the signing of the 1971 Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, friendship and cooperation to the modern-day declarations of a special and privileged strategic partnership by Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin, the bond between New Delhi and Moscow has been described as time-tested and strategic rather than transactional. Yet in early 2026, headlines across global media began suggesting that this historic friendship was entering turbulent waters. Russia's share of India's crude oil imports fell sharply to around 19%, its lowest level in over a year, while India simultaneously advanced deeper trade understandings with the United States. Observers began asking whether Moscow was punishing New Delhi for drifting toward Washington, and whether Russia's increased engagement with Pakistan signaled a deeper geopolitical shift. To understand whether this narrative holds weight, we must step back and examine the broader context. When Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine in 2022, Western sanctions dramatically altered global energy flows. Europe reduced its dependence on Russian crude, forcing Moscow to seek alternative markets. India, driven by energy security and price sensitivity, stepped into that vacuum. Discounted Russian Urals crude began flowing to Indian refineries at unprecedented volumes. At its peak, Russia accounted for roughly one-third to nearly 40% of India's crude imports, transforming bilateral trade into a $60 to $70 billion relationship largely fueled by energy transactions. India benefited from lower import costs, helping manage inflation in a volatile global economy, while Russia secured a critical revenue stream amid sanctions pressure. This arrangement was pragmatic, not ideological. It reflected India's long-standing policy of prioritizing national interest over bloc politics. By January 2026, however, Russia's share had dropped to about 19%. On the surface, the decline appeared dramatic. Critics quickly interpreted it as evidence that India was yielding to American pressure. Washington had made clear, through both diplomatic channels and indirect financial mechanisms, that deeper economic integration with the U.S. and access to advanced technologies would be easier if India reduced its dependence on sanctioned Russian energy. Secondary sanctions risks, shipping insurance complications, and payment settlement challenges in rupee-ruble mechanisms created friction. At the same time, global oil markets adjusted. Russian crude discounts narrowed as alternative buyers stabilized demand. Indian refiners, operating within strict commercial parameters, diversified sourcing accordingly. Yet even after the dip, Russia remained one of India's largest crude suppliers. This was not a complete severing of ties but a recalibration shaped by market forces, compliance realities, and geopolitical balancing. More importantly, oil represents only one pillar of the India-Russia relationship. The true bedrock lies in defense cooperation. During the Cold War, when Western nations were reluctant to supply India with advanced military hardware, the Soviet Union became New Delhi's principal defense partner. That foundation continues today. A significant portion of India's armed forces platforms trace their origins to Soviet or Russian systems. The Indian Army operates hundreds of T-90 tanks. The Indian Air Force relies heavily on Su-30 Mki fighter jets produced under license in India. The Indian Navy fields vessels equipped with Russian-origin missile systems. The advanced S-400 acquired from Moscow dramatically strengthened India's air defense architecture despite U.S. warnings under COTSA sanctions legislation. These systems are not off-the-shelf purchases, they involve deep training, maintenance integration, spare parts supply chains, and long-term strategic trust. In December 2021, India and Russia extended their military technical cooperation agreement through 2031, signaling long-term intent beyond short-term turbulence. Joint military exercises under the INDRA framework resumed after temporary pauses. Negotiations and contracts continued for naval air defense systems and advanced missile platforms. Discussions around fifth-generation fighter collaboration, including the Sukhoi Su-57, remain part of strategic dialogue. such developments contradict the notion of punitive disengagement. Defense relationships of this scale cannot be unwound abruptly without destabilizing national security structures. Moscow understands India's importance not only as a customer but as a strategic partner that balances China's dominance in Eurasia. New Delhi recognizes Russia's enduring value as a defense technology partner willing to share capabilities that Western nations historically restricted. The Pakistan dimension further complicates the narrative. In recent years, Russia has cautiously expanded limited engagement with Islamabad, including counter-terrorism exercises known as Druzhba and diplomatic exchanges at higher levels. Some analysts view this as a signal to India that Moscow has alternatives. However, the scale of Russia-Pakistan interaction remains modest compared to the depth of Russia-India ties. There are no sweeping defense technology transfers comparable to those shared with India, no foundational treaty structures, and no evidence of a strategic alliance replacing the Indo-Russian framework. For Moscow, outreach to Pakistan serves as geopolitical hedging, demonstrating flexibility and influence across South Asia rather than signaling abandonment of New Delhi. For India, such engagement is monitored but not perceived as an existential rupture, precisely because the structural weight of Indo-Russian cooperation remains unmatched. Simultaneously, India's relationship with the United States has grown substantially over the past 2 decades. Defense agreements such as Lemoa and Kumkesa, expanding naval exercises like Malabar, and increasing collaboration in critical technologies reflect shared concerns about Indo-Pacific stability, particularly in relation to China's rise. Trade volumes between India and the United States have surpassed $190 billion annually, making Washington one of New Delhi's largest economic partners. Semiconductor initiatives, supply chain diversification strategies, and defense co-production discussions signal convergence in high-tech domains. Yet despite this growing partnership, India has consistently resisted formal alliance structures. It has refrained from joining Western sanctions against Russia, abstained from outright condemnation votes in certain multilateral forums, and continued energy purchases when economically viable. This balancing act is not accidental, it is rooted in India's doctrine of strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy evolved from the non-aligned movement ethos but has matured into a modern framework suited for a multipolar world. Rather than aligning permanently with any single bloc, India seeks to preserve decision-making independence while maximizing partnerships across issue areas. Energy security may require engagement with Russia and the Middle East. Advanced technology collaboration may require partnership with the United States and Europe. Defense diversification increasingly includes France and Israel alongside Russia. Participation in groupings such as BRICS reflects engagement with emerging economies, while Quad membership reflects coordination with maritime democracies. These overlapping networks are not contradictory, they represent portfolio diversification in statecraft. India's leaders recognize that overdependence on any one power constrains sovereignty. From Moscow's perspective, India remains a valuable counterbalance in Asia. As Russia deepens its partnership with China under Western sanctions pressure, it is careful not to alienate India, which has its own border tensions with Beijing. Maintaining robust ties with New Delhi ensures Russia retains influence in South Asia and avoids becoming excessively dependent on China. Energy trade, defense cooperation, nuclear energy collaboration, and space exploration projects collectively sustain this multidimensional relationship. Even when oil volumes fluctuate, structural interests persist. Therefore, what appears in headlines as a dramatic rupture is, upon closer examination, an adaptive recalibration within a changing global order. The post-Cold War era's unipolar moment has given way to a fragmented multipolar environment where middle powers wield greater agency. India's demographic weight, economic growth trajectory, technological ambition, and military modernization grant it leverage. It no longer operates as a junior partner reliant on a single patron. Instead, it negotiates with Washington from a position of growing strength while maintaining institutional depth with Moscow. Russia, facing its own constraints, similarly adapts without discarding long-standing partnerships. The temporary dip in oil imports, the optics of diplomatic outreach to Pakistan, and the parallel strengthening of US-India ties do not constitute betrayal or punishment. They illustrate the complexity of 21st-century geopolitics, where energy flows, defense supply chains, and diplomatic alignments intersect but do not automatically determine each other. India's foreign policy elite understands that maintaining flexibility is essential in an era defined by economic coercion, sanctions regimes, technological competition, and shifting power balances. Russia, for its part, understands that alienating India would weaken its strategic posture in Asia. Ultimately, the India-Russia relationship is not ending, it is evolving. It is transitioning from a Cold War-era dependency model to a more balanced partnership within a competitive multipolar framework. Oil volumes may rise or fall with market conditions. Trade agreements with Washington may expand. Diplomatic gestures toward Pakistan may continue. Yet the structural pillars, defense integration, nuclear cooperation, energy collaboration, and geopolitical consultation, remain firmly in place. India is not choosing between East and West, it is choosing strategic flexibility. Russia is not punishing India, it is adapting alongside it. In this evolving landscape, the real story is not the collapse of a historic friendship but the emergence of a confident India navigating great power competition on its own terms, preserving sovereignty while engaging all sides. That dynamic, more than any headline, defines the future trajectory of one of the world's most consequential bilateral relationships.